Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I have been working night security at military installations for almost 15 years. I started right after my military service ended in 2006, thinking I knew the routine and how to manage myself. Louisiana gets very hot during the day, really stifling, so night shifts always suited me better. Cooler weather, quieter hours, just you, the surroundings, and the occasional patrol check. The base I worked at, I won't say which one, but those who have served in this part of Louisiana probably know what I mean, always had its stories. Every base has them. Guys who sit around telling stories to pass the time. Most of it nonsense, I thought. Ghost stories to scare the newcomers, to make the nights a little less boring. There was a story about a man in a top hat walking along the narrow dirt road next to the old depot facility. Another was about a crazy vagrant who was hit by a patrol car and fled into the woods, never to be found again. Over the years, I heard dozens of these, but I never really believed any of them. But there was one story that stuck with me differently. Second night on the job, back in '06, I was paired with an older guy named Kowalski. He'd been there for years, knew every corner of that base like the back of his hand. Tall guy, probably in his late 40s, with this weathered face that made him look like he'd seen more than he wanted to. He didn't talk much during our first patrol together, just drove and watched the road with this constant alertness that never seemed to fade. We were assigned to the storage area that night, rows and rows of old structures, most of them empty now, relics from when this place was busier. The kind of buildings that look industrial and cold even in daylight, all concrete and steel and narrow windows that never seem to reflect light quite right. At night they looked worse, like something out of an old prison film, just these dark geometric shapes rising out of the ground. The storage facility sat on the eastern edge of the base, separated from everything else by maybe half a mile of empty field. No lights out there except what we brought with us. No other patrols came through unless specifically assigned. It was isolated in a way that made you aware of how alone you really were. Kowalski told me about a little girl, said it happened way back, before either of us were born, when they were still building out some of the facilities in the storage zone. Her father worked construction there, brought her along one day. Shouldn't have, but he did. Story goes she was playing on one of the structures while he was working, climbed up too high and slipped, fell from the top, died on impact. He told me this while we were driving, his voice flat and factual like he was reading from a report. No embellishment, no dramatic pauses, just the facts as he'd heard them. The girl's name was Sarah, he said, 7 years old. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in July, sometime in the early 70s. The father quit the next day, and nobody ever saw him again. The whole thing felt like typical campfire bullshit to me. Details didn't even make sense. Why would a construction site let a kid run around? Why wasn't anyone watching her? But Kowalski told it with this stone, serious face, and when he drove me out to the exact spot where it supposedly happened, I felt something shift in my gut. The building was near the center of the facility, right on a road we'd later come to call Echo Street, though I don't think it had an official name back then. It was a 4-story structure, nothing special about it architecturally, just another concrete box with small windows and a flat roof. But standing there in front of it, engine idling, I felt this strange weight in the air, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the span of a few seconds. Kowalski cut the engine, turned off the radio. We just sat there in the dark, surrounded by these silent structures, and I realized how far we were from everything else on the base. No lights, no sounds. Just us and the night and this building that suddenly felt too large, too present. I could hear my own breathing, could hear Kowalski breathing beside me, slow and steady. Could hear the engine ticking as it cooled. Nothing else. Kowalski sat there staring straight ahead like he was waiting for something. I kept glancing at him, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me he was messing with me. He didn't. His hands stayed on the wheel even though the engine was off. His eyes stayed fixed on that building. After maybe 10 minutes, he started the engine again and we drove off. He never said another word about it. Not that night, not any night after. I tried to bring it up once, maybe a week later, and he just shook his head and changed the subject. I worked that storage area on and off for the next 3 years. Did patrols there probably 100 times. Different partners, different vehicles. Nothing ever happened. I started to forget about Kowalski's story, filed it away with all the other base legends I'd heard. The man in the top hat, the vagrant in the woods, the usual ghost story fodder that every military installation seems to accumulate over the decades. By 2009, Kowalski had transferred out. I never found out where he went. A few of the guys said he retired, moved back to Michigan or Minnesota or somewhere up north. Someone else said he requested a transfer to a base overseas. I never thought to ask before he left, and by the time I realized he was gone, it was too late. Then came the night in late August that changed things. It was late August, humid as hell even at night. The kind of heat that clings to you, makes your uniform stick to your skin, makes the air feel thick enough to chew. Me and my partner Jimmy were assigned to the storage facility for overnight patrol. Jimmy was younger than me, maybe 25, been on the base for about a year. Good guy, easy to work with. Talked a lot, but in a way that made the hours go by faster. We were supposed to do 3 random checks throughout the shift, and the first 2 went fine. Routine. Boring, even. We'd drive through, check the locks on the structures, make sure nothing looked disturbed, then head back out. Each check took maybe 30 minutes start to finish. But here's the thing. Our regular vehicle was in the shop that week, so they gave us this piece of shit cattle truck to use instead. I'm not kidding. An actual cattle truck, the kind with the open bed and the metal gates rattling in the back. The kind farmers use to haul livestock to market. Why the base even had one of these, I have no idea, but that's what we got stuck with. It drove like garbage and sounded worse. The suspension was shot, so every bump in the road felt like you were getting punched in the spine. The steering pulled hard to the left, and those metal gates in the back rattled constantly, this irregular clanging sound that never stopped, not even when we were going slow. Jimmy complained about it for the first hour of our shift, then gave up and just accepted it. We made jokes about it, called it the Bovine Express, laughed about how we'd smell like cow shit by the end of the night even though the truck had been cleaned. It was uncomfortable and loud, but it got us where we needed to go. Around 4 a.m, we decided to do our final check. Maintenance guys had all gone home by then, so the whole area was deserted. The only way in was through these 2 massive gates that took forever to unlock and open. Heavy steel things, probably 10 feet tall, with chains and padlocks that always seemed to stick. We pulled up. I got out and wrestled with the locks for a few minutes while Jimmy sat in the truck with the engine running. Finally, got them both open, pulled through, then locked them behind us. Procedure. The facility looked different at 4 a.m. Darker, somehow. Even though the moon was out and visibility was decent. The shadows between the buildings seemed deeper, more solid. The air had that strange stillness that comes right before dawn, when the night is at its quietest and even the insects seem to hold their breath. Jimmy was driving. I was on spotlight duty, checking the locks on each structure as we rolled past. We had a big handheld spotlight, the kind that plugs into the cigarette lighter, and I'd sweep it across each building as we passed, looking for anything out of place. Broken windows, open doors, signs of forced entry. Anything. Everything was quiet. We were talking, shooting the shit, keeping ourselves awake. Jimmy was telling me about some girl he'd met over the weekend, trying to figure out if he should ask her out or if she was just being friendly. I was half listening, giving him the usual advice. The kind of conversation you have when you're tired and trying to stay alert and not really thinking about what you're saying. Then we turned onto Echo Street. That's what we called it. A long road that ran through the center of the storage area, lined with these old concrete structures on both sides. And right in the middle of that street was the building from Kowalski's story, the one where the girl supposedly fell. I hadn't thought about that story in months. Maybe a year. But the moment we turned onto that road, I felt it. Something changed. The air felt heavier. The noise from the truck, the rattle of the gates, the diesel engine. It all seemed to get quieter, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Even Jimmy went quiet, which was unusual. He was always talking, always filling the silence. But as we drove down Echo Street, he stopped mid-sentence and didn't start again. I noticed his hands tighten on the wheel, noticed the way his shoulders tensed. He felt it too, whatever it was. We were maybe halfway down the street when I turned to look out my window, away from the structures. I don't know why. Just felt like I needed to look away from that building, the one where it happened. Like something in my gut was telling me not to look directly at it. That's when I heard it. A sound, low, drawn out, like someone groaning, but not in pain exactly. More like distress. Like someone struggling to breathe, pulling in air through a closing throat. It sounded like it was coming from right behind me, from the empty middle seat between me and Jimmy. My blood went cold. The sound was close, so close, I could have sworn I felt breath on the back of my neck. I whipped around to look at Jimmy. "Dude, cut that shit out." He looked at me confused, taking his foot off the gas a little. "What? Am I going too fast?" I held up my hand, cutting him off. Listened, there it was again. That sound, louder this time. A long, rattling groan that made the hair on my arms stand up. It had this quality to it that wasn't quite human, but wasn't quite anything else either, like vocal cords that didn't work right anymore, pushing air through a throat that couldn't quite form the sounds it wanted to. "Turn the radio off," I whispered. Jimmy looked at me like I was crazy, but he reached over and shut it off. The truck slowed to a crawl, then stopped completely. We were right in front of the building now. The one from the story. For a second or two, there was nothing. Just the low rumble of the engine and the faint clatter of the metal gates in the back. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. Could hear Jimmy breathing beside me, shallow and quick. Then we both heard it. That groan. That awful, drawn-out sound. It echoed inside the cab of the truck, like it was coming from everywhere at once. Like something was surrounding us. The sound filled the space between us, resonated in the metal frame of the truck, seemed to vibrate through the seats. "What the fuck is that?" Jimmy's voice cracked. He wasn't joking around. His face had gone pale, visible even in the dim light from the dashboard. Neither was I. We sat there frozen, listening. The sound came again, even louder this time. It had this layered quality to it, like multiple voices groaning at once, but slightly out of sync. It didn't sound like wind. It didn't sound like metal on metal. It sounded human, or something that used to be human, and it sounded like it was getting closer. Jimmy didn't wait for me to say anything. He slammed the truck into drive and floored it, tearing down Echo Street faster than I'd ever seen anyone drive through that facility. The cattle truck lurched forward. those metal gates in the back crashing and banging as we picked up speed. We nearly flipped, taking the turn at the end of the road, the whole vehicle tilting sickeningly to one side before slamming back down. Neither of us cared. We just wanted out. We hit the gates, and I jumped out before the truck even fully stopped, fumbling with the locks, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in. Jimmy sat in the driver's seat watching my back. Engine still running, ready to bolt. I could see him in my peripheral vision, head swiveling back and forth, watching the road behind us like something might come tearing out of the darkness. I got both gates open, Jimmy drove through, and I locked them behind us as fast as I could. My hands were still shaking. My heart was hammering in my chest. We didn't say a word until we got back to the main part of the base, just drove in silence with the radio off and the windows up. When we finally radioed our flight chief and told him we needed to talk, I expected him to laugh at us, to tell us we were tired, imagining things, that 12-hour night shifts mess with your head, that the rattling from the truck had played tricks on us, that old buildings make strange sounds at night. He didn't. He met us outside the operations building about 20 minutes later. We told him everything. The sound, the feeling in the air, the way it seemed to surround us. Jimmy did most of the talking, his words coming out fast and jumbled, and I just nodded along, confirming the details. When we finished, the flight chief just looked at us for a long moment. He was an older guy, probably in his 50s, been at the base longer than anyone else I knew. He had this weathered face, tired eyes, the look of someone who'd seen things he didn't talk about. Then he nodded. "I believe you," he said. "Same thing happened to me. Twice. Once in that exact spot, and once," he pointed over his shoulder at the building behind him. "The jailhouse. In there. Different sound, but the same feeling, like something's there that shouldn't be." He didn't elaborate, didn't tell us his story, just confirmed that we weren't crazy, weren't imagining things, and then told us to write up a basic report for the log. Nothing detailed, just that we'd completed our patrol and hadn't found any security issues. I went back to the storage facility one more time after that. Daytime, different assignment. Different. I don't talk about Vietnam much. Most guys who served don't. It's not something you bring up at dinner parties or family gatherings. People ask sometimes, especially when they find out I was there, and I give them the standard answers. Hot, humid, dangerous. Then I change the subject and they usually let it go. But there's one thing that happened over there that I've never been able to fully explain. Not to myself, not to anyone. I've told my wife about it, years after we got married, late one night when I couldn't sleep. Told a few close friends. They listened, nodded, didn't ask many questions. I think they could tell I wasn't looking for answers, just needed to say it out loud. It happened in 1968, near the end of my tour. I was 20 years old, fresh out of high school when I got drafted. Didn't know anything about the war, didn't know anything about Vietnam, except what I'd seen on the news. Jungle, heat, Viet Cong. That was the extent of my knowledge. I arrived on a Friday evening in June. The air hit me the moment I stepped off the plane, thick and wet and hot in a way I'd never experienced before. It wasn't like summer heat back home. This was different. Heavier, it pressed down on you, made it hard to breathe, and the smell. I'll never forget that smell. Like rot and exhaust and something else I couldn't identify, something organic and wrong. They loaded us onto buses and drove us to base. I remember looking out the window at the landscape, trying to make sense of where I was. Rice paddies, dense vegetation, small villages that looked ancient and temporary at the same time. The roads were rough, unpaved in places, and the bus rattled and shook as we drove. The other guys on the bus were quiet. Some of them were returning from leave, heading back to their units. They had this look in their eyes, distant and tired, like they'd already seen too much. A few of the new guys tried to make conversation, but it didn't go anywhere. Everyone just stared out the windows or down at their hands, lost in their own thoughts. My first night was quiet, uneventful, but the tension was there, hanging in the air like the humidity. You could feel it in the way the other soldiers moved, the way they talked. Everyone was on edge, even when nothing was happening. The barracks were basic. Rows of cots with mosquito netting, wooden walls that didn't quite meet the ceiling, gaps in the floorboards where you could see the ground below. At night, you could hear everything. Boots on dirt, voices in the distance, the occasional crack of gunfire from somewhere far off that made you freeze and listen and wonder if it was coming closer. I didn't sleep much that first week. The heat made it hard, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. You'd hear someone roll over on their cot, and it would sound like someone moving through the barracks. You'd hear the wind in the trees and wonder if it was really wind or something else. Basic training had prepared me for some of it. The physical part, the weapons, the chain of command. But nothing prepares you for the reality of it. The waiting, the uncertainty, the knowledge that at any moment everything could go sideways and there was nothing you could do about it. I was assigned as a radio operator. RTO, they called it. Radio telephone operator. I wasn't much of a fighter, didn't have the temperament for it, but I was good with technical stuff, good at staying calm under pressure, good at following procedures. So they strapped a radio to my back and told me my job was to keep communications open between our unit and everyone else. Keep the information flowing. Make sure everyone knew what was happening everywhere else. The radio itself was massive. Must have weighed 30 pounds with the battery. Add that to all the other gear I carried and I was humping close to 70 pounds through the jungle every day. Ammunition, water, rations, extra batteries, medical supplies, everything you might need to survive if you got separated from the unit or pinned down somewhere. But I didn't complain. Nobody complained. That's just how it was. I got assigned to a unit that had just lost their previous RTO to a landmine. Nobody talked about him much. I learned his name was Miller, that he'd been with them for 6 months, that he'd stepped wrong during a patrol and that was it. Gone. They needed a replacement, and I was it. The guys in my unit were decent. A little distant at first, which I understood. They'd just lost someone, and here I was taking his place. But they warmed up after a few days. Taught me the rhythms of their patrol patterns. Showed me where to walk, what to watch for, how to read the jungle, spot disturbed ground, notice when the birds went quiet. There was a corporal named Jenkins who took me under his wing. He'd been in country for almost a year, knew the area better than anyone. He showed me how to pack my gear so the weight distributed evenly, how to tape down anything that might rattle or make noise, how to move through the jungle without leaving obvious tracks. He also told me stories, not the ghost stories or the bullshit rumors that circulated through base, real stories about firefights he'd been in, friends he'd lost, close calls that could have gone either way. He didn't sugarcoat anything, just told it straight, matter of fact, like he was describing the weather. The first time we made contact with the enemy was about 2 weeks after I joined the unit. We were moving through dense jungle, visibility maybe 20 feet in any direction, when the shooting started. Loudest thing I'd ever heard. The sound just surrounded us, coming from everywhere at once. We hit the ground and returned fire, shooting into the trees, into the undergrowth, at targets we couldn't see. It felt like it went on forever, but it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Then silence. We moved forward slowly, weapons up, and found them. 3 Viet Cong soldiers. Dead. Lying in a small clearing, their bodies torn apart by our gunfire. I'd never seen a dead person before. Not like that. Not someone who'd been alive minutes earlier. They were young, probably around my age. One of them still had his eyes open, staring up at nothing. Another had his hand outstretched like he'd been reaching for something when he died. The third was face down, his back a mess of exit wounds. I stood there looking at them and felt nothing. No horror, no guilt, no satisfaction. Just nothing. They were the enemy, and they would have killed us if given the chance. That's what I told myself. That's what everyone told themselves. Jenkins put his hand on my shoulder. "First time?" I nodded. "Gets easier," he said, then walked away. We moved on. Left the bodies there. That was standard procedure. The jungle would take care of them. A few days later, we got reassigned to a different location. Heavier casualties there, they said. Needed more support. So we packed up and moved. I got used to the violence pretty quickly. Saw a lot of our guys die. Young men, boys really, with families back home, who would get a folded flag and a letter expressing the nation's gratitude. It all started to blur together after a while. The heat, the fear, the waiting, the sudden bursts of chaos followed by long stretches of nothing. You learn to shut off part of your brain, to stop thinking about what it all meant, to just do your job and try to stay alive. We lost Jenkins in July. Sniper, one shot. He was walking point and then he wasn't. Just dropped without a sound. We never even saw where the shot came from. Just dragged his body back and called for a medevac, even though we knew it was too late. I took over some of his responsibilities after that. Helped train the newer guys. Showed them what Jenkins had shown me. The cycle just continued, people rotating in and out, some going home, some not. Then one day, maybe 3 months into my tour, my NCO told me someone wanted to see me. I reported to the command tent expecting a briefing or reassignment. Instead, I found an older man waiting for me. He looked out of place. Too clean. Too calm. He wore standard fatigues, but they looked pressed, like he'd just put them on that morning. He was probably in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. Gray hair cut military short. Pale blue eyes that didn't blink much. He stood perfectly still when he talked, no wasted movement, and when he looked at you it felt like he was calculating something. Measuring you. Deciding if you were useful. He introduced himself as Frederick Douglass. Said he was an intelligence officer stationed nearby. Said I was being temporarily assigned to his unit as their RTO. He didn't ask if I was okay with it. Didn't explain why. Didn't tell me how long the assignment would last. Just told me to grab my gear and follow him. I looked at my NCO for confirmation. He nodded. Wouldn't meet my eyes. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but orders are orders. I grabbed my radio and my pack and followed Douglas out to a waiting helicopter. The helicopter was an older model. No markings I recognized. The pilot didn't acknowledge us when we climbed in. Just kept his eyes forward, hands on the controls, waiting. Douglas sat across from me and stared out the window. Didn't say a word the entire flight. We flew for maybe 20 minutes, heading northeast. I tried to ask Douglas questions, but he ignored me, just stared out the window at the jungle passing below. The door gunner kept glancing back at us but didn't say anything either. The whole flight was silent except for the rotor noise. I watched the terrain change beneath us. Dense jungle giving way to hills, then back to jungle again. No villages, no roads, no signs of human activity. Just endless green broken occasionally by rivers that snaked through the canopy like brown veins. We landed in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. There were structures there. Small buildings that looked like they'd been Viet Cong huts originally, but had been reinforced and modified. Sandbags stacked around the perimeters. camouflage netting strung between trees. It looked like a forward operating base, but smaller, more isolated. There were maybe a dozen soldiers there. They looked up when we landed but didn't approach, didn't wave, just watched us with these blank expressions. A few of them were wearing gas masks even though there was no gas, no smoke, nothing that would require protection. They just stood there in the heat with those masks on, staring. Something was very wrong with this place. I could feel it immediately. The atmosphere was off, too quiet, too still. Even the jungle around us seemed muted, like the usual sounds of birds and insects had been dampened somehow. Douglas led me to one of the smaller huts and told me to wait there. Said someone would come get me when they needed me. Then he walked off toward the largest structure in the compound, leaving me alone. The hut was basic. Dirt floor, wooden walls, a cot in the corner with a thin mattress that looked like it hadn't been changed in months. No windows, just an open doorway with a piece of canvas hanging over it. I set my gear down and sat on the cot, trying to process what was happening. The heat inside the hut was oppressive. No air circulation. Just stale, humid air that sat heavy in my lungs. I could hear voices outside, low and distant, but couldn't make out what they were saying. Footsteps occasionally passed by the doorway, but nobody looked in. Nobody checked on me. I tried to relax, tried to tell myself this was just another assignment, but something felt deeply wrong. The way those soldiers had stared at us. The gas masks. The silence. It all added up to something I didn't understand and didn't want to understand. I should have stayed there, should have followed orders. But I've never been good at sitting still, especially when I'm nervous, and I was very nervous. So, after maybe 30 minutes, I got up and stepped outside. The compound was quiet. A few soldiers moving between buildings, but not talking. Not looking at each other, just moving with this strange mechanical precision, like they were following routines they'd done 1,000 times. Their movements were synchronized in a way that felt rehearsed, unnatural. One of them passed close to me, close enough that I could have reached out and touched him. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance in my direction, just kept walking with his eyes fixed straight ahead, like I wasn't there. I walked toward the main tent, the one Douglas had entered. Told myself I was just stretching my legs, getting familiar with the layout. But really, I was curious. Something about this place didn't make sense, and I wanted to understand what I'd been brought into. The tent flap was partially open. I could see light inside, bright fluorescent light that seemed harsh and out of place in the jungle. I moved closer, staying quiet, and peered through the gap. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a makeshift table in the center of the tent, about 8 feet long, made from wooden planks set on sawhorses. And on that table were 6 containers. Large glass jars, maybe a gallon each, filled with a murky green liquid that seemed to glow slightly in the fluorescent light. And in each jar was a human head. Not American, Vietnamese. Viet Cong soldiers based on the uniforms I could see on the severed necks. Their faces were preserved somehow, features still intact, eyes closed like they were sleeping. But they weren't sleeping, because as I watched, one of them moved. Just slightly. The mouth twitched, the eyelids fluttered. Like something was still alive in there, something trying to wake up. There were tubes running into the jars, connected to the heads at various points. The neck, the base of the skull, some kind of apparatus I didn't understand, didn't want to understand. Wires, too, thin ones, disappearing into the liquid and connecting to equipment I couldn't see from my angle. Machines hummed quietly in the background, a steady electrical drone that made my teeth ache. The green liquid was bubbling slightly, reacting with the tissue. And as I stared, I saw another head move. This one opened its eyes, just for a second. just long enough for me to see that there was something behind those eyes, some awareness, some consciousness that shouldn't have been possible. The eyes moved, looked around the inside of the jar, then focused forward, staring at nothing, before closing again. I wanted to run, wanted to turn around and get back in that helicopter and leave this place, but I couldn't move. Just stood there frozen, watching those jars, watching those heads, trying to understand what I was seeing. I felt a hand on my shoulder and nearly screamed. It was Douglas. His face was calm, but his grip was iron, fingers digging into my shoulder hard enough to hurt. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just stared at him with my mouth open, trying to process what I'd just seen. He pulled me away from the tent, not roughly but firmly, guiding me back toward my hut. His hand never left my shoulder. When we got there, he stopped and looked at me with those pale blue eyes. "What you saw," he said. "You didn't see it, understand?" I nodded. Didn't know what else to do. "This is classified work," he continued. "Important work. We're gathering intelligence from enemy combatants using advanced techniques. That's all you need to know. You speak about this to anyone and it's treason. Understand?" I nodded again. My voice wouldn't work. He stared at me for another long moment, then turned and walked away. I watched him go, watched him disappear back towards that tent, and felt something cold settle in my gut. I sat in that hut for the rest of the day, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. Maybe they were medical specimens. Maybe it was some kind of psychological operation, trying to preserve enemy remains for identification purposes. Maybe the movement I'd seen was just post-mortem muscle contractions, nerves still firing randomly after death. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen those eyes open, seen that awareness, seen the way they moved with purpose, with intention. That night I heard explosions. Not close, but not far either. Artillery fire maybe a mile away. The ground shook. I grabbed my gear and ran outside, but there was no alarm, no one mobilizing. The soldiers just went about their business like nothing was happening. Then I heard someone shouting, running. The whole compound suddenly came alive, people moving fast, grabbing weapons, converging on something I couldn't see. I tried to find Douglas, but couldn't. Tried to find anyone who would tell me what was happening, but everyone ignored me. Just ran past like I wasn't there. Gunfire erupted from somewhere beyond the perimeter. Close. Closer than the artillery had been. I heard someone screaming, the sound cutting off abruptly, and then more gunfire, sustained and heavy. Then nothing. Silence. The activity stopped as suddenly as it had started. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital. Triage, they called it. A big tent full of cots and wounded soldiers and medics moving between beds with clipboards and IV bags. I was in one of those cots with my ribs wrapped tight and my left arm in a sling. Compound fracture of the collarbone, they told me. 3 broken ribs, mild concussion, lacerations across my back from shrapnel. I had no memory of what happened, no memory of anything after hearing those explosions. They said we were attacked, said the compound was overrun, said I was lucky to be alive, but when I asked about Douglas, about the other soldiers, about the work they were doing in that tent, nobody knew what I was talking about. No record of any Frederick Douglass serving in Vietnam. No record of any intelligence operation in that area. No record of the compound existing at all. They said I must have been confused. Must have gotten my wires crossed from the head injury. Must have dreamed some of it. But I didn't dream those heads. Didn't dream those eyes opening. Didn't dream that green liquid or the tubes or the wires. I finished my tour 6 months later and came home. Got married a few years after that. Had kids. Built a normal life. But I never forgot what I saw in that tent. I tried to find information about it over the years. Wrote letters to various military offices asking about experimental intelligence programs in Vietnam. Never got any real answers. Just form letters thanking me for my service and assuring me that all wartime activities were conducted within appropriate legal and ethical guidelines. I looked for Frederick Douglass, too. Searched for any record of him. Nothing. The name was probably fake anyway. Sometimes I wonder if they were trying to extract information from dead enemy soldiers. Some kind of neural preservation technique, keeping the brain alive after death long enough to access memories. Sounds like science fiction, but we were doing a lot of experimental work over there that never made it into the history books. Sometimes I wonder if they succeeded. If somewhere in a classified file there's data from those preserved heads. Intelligence gathered from the dead. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if those heads are still there. Still in their jars. Still aware. Still trying to wake up. Still opening their eyes in the dark, looking for something they'll never find. I'll never know, but I saw what I saw, and no amount of missing records or official denials will change that. I've worked to search and rescue for 16 years now. Started in Colorado, moved to Montana after 5 years, been here ever since. It's good work, important work, but it changes you. You see things that stay with you, bodies that have been in the wilderness too long, people who made one wrong turn and paid for it with their lives, families that never got closure. But there's one case that I can't explain, one search that ended in a way that still keeps me up at night. It happened in the fall of 2011. Late September, just as the weather was starting to turn. We got a call about a missing hiker, a woman named Sarah Chen, 32 years old, experienced outdoors person. She'd gone out for a day hike on the Blacktail Ridge Trail and never came back. Her car was still at the trailhead 3 days later when a ranger noticed it and ran the plates. The trail itself wasn't particularly dangerous. 8 miles round trip, well-marked, moderate elevation gain. The kind of hike experienced people do alone all the time without incident. But 3 days was a long time to be missing, especially with the temperatures dropping at night. We'd already had frost warnings that week, temperatures in the low 30s after dark. We assembled a team of 12, started the search early on a Thursday morning. The weather was clear, which was good, cold but clear. We split into groups of 3 and spread out along the trail and the surrounding areas, calling her name, looking for any signs. I was partnered with 2 other guys, Marcus and Tom, both solid, experienced. Marcus had been doing this for almost 20 years, former military. The kind of guy who never panicked, no matter what we found. Tom was newer, only 3 years in, but he was thorough and had good instincts. We'd worked together on dozens of searches over the years. We took the northern section, moving off trail into denser forest where someone might have wandered if they got disoriented. The first day we found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed vegetation, no pieces of clothing or equipment, just empty forest. We covered maybe 6 square miles working in a grid pattern, documenting everything. By the time the sun started setting, we headed back to base camp, exhausted and frustrated. Base camp was set up in a clearing near the trailhead. Command tent, supply tent, a few tables with maps spread out showing our search grids. The other teams reported the same thing we had. Nothing. No trace of Sarah Chen anywhere. Her parents arrived that evening. I watched them walk into camp, both in their 60s, holding on to each other like they might collapse without the support. The lead coordinator talked to them while we ate cold sandwiches and planned the next day's search. I could hear her mother crying from inside the command tent. Day 2 was the same. Different area, same result. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. We expanded our search radius, pushed further into rougher terrain, called her name until our voices went hoarse, checked every ravine, every dense thicket, every place a body might be hidden or trapped. Her family was calling us every few hours for updates. We had nothing to tell them. With each passing hour, the likelihood of finding her alive decreased. We all knew it, but nobody said it out loud. The wilderness can kill you in dozens of ways. Exposure, dehydration, a fall that breaks your leg and leaves you unable to walk, an encounter with wildlife, a simple wrong turn that takes you miles off course. We'd seen all of it before, but usually we found something, a piece of clothing, footprints, some indication of where the person had gone. This time we had nothing. On the third day, we expanded the search area further north, into terrain that was rougher, less traveled, rocky outcroppings, dense undergrowth, small ravines that could hide a body if someone had fallen wrong. The terrain was difficult, slow going, but we were running out of places to look. That's when Marcus found the backpack. It was sitting on a flat rock outcropping, about 2 miles off trail, in an area we'd designated as low probability. The backpack was open, contents spread out neatly beside it. Water bottle, granola bars, first aid kit, a fleece jacket, map and compass, everything you'd expect to find in a day hiker's pack. But here's what didn't make sense. The items were arranged, not scattered like someone had dumped the pack in a panic. Arranged in a line, ordered by size, like someone had carefully unpacked everything and laid it out for inspection. The water bottle was on the left, still half full. Next to it were the granola bars, 3 of them placed parallel to each other. Then the first aid kit, unopened. The fleece jacket was folded into a neat square. The map and compass sat at the end of the line, the map folded precisely, the compass placed on top of it, and the backpack itself was clean. No dirt, no damage, sitting there like someone had just set it down minutes ago. "What the hell is this?" Tom said, staring at the arrangement. Marcus was already on the radio calling it in. I walked around the outcropping, looking for footprints, any sign of which direction Sarah had gone. The rock was smooth granite, wouldn't hold prints, but the dirt around the edges might. I found tracks leading away from the outcropping, heading north. Small prints, consistent with a woman's hiking boots. They were clear, deliberate, evenly spaced. Not the tracks of someone stumbling or confused. The other teams converged on our position within 30 minutes. We established a perimeter and started searching the immediate area in detail, figuring Sarah had to be close by. The lead coordinator took photos of the arranged items before anyone touched them. Something about the scene felt wrong to all of us, but nobody said it. We followed the tracks. They led through a section of forest, weaving between trees but maintaining a generally straight path. No signs of hesitation or backtracking, just steady forward movement. We found her about 100 yards away. She was sitting against a tree, legs stretched out in front of her, hands folded in her lap, eyes closed. At first glance, she looked like she was sleeping, like she'd just decided to rest for a moment and dozed off. But she wasn't sleeping. She'd been dead for at least 2 days. The medical examiner confirmed it later. Exposure, most likely. The nights had been getting down into the 30s, and she was only wearing a t-shirt and hiking pants. The fleece jacket we'd found with her pack would have kept her alive. But she'd taken it off, taken everything off, unpacked it all, arranged it on that rock, and then walked away from it. That alone wasn't unheard of. Paradoxical undressing, they call it. Happens sometimes in the late stages of hypothermia. The body's thermoregulation breaks down, and people feel hot when they're actually freezing. They strip off their clothes and wander away. We've seen it before. It's a known phenomenon, documented in survival literature. But there were other things that didn't fit. Her boots were missing. Not removed and left somewhere, just gone. We searched the entire area and never found them. She'd walked through rough terrain in just her socks, and her feet showed the damage. Cuts, bruises, torn fabric. But she'd walked in a straight line. We could follow her trail easily, heading directly away from the backpack toward the tree where we found her. No meandering. No signs of confusion or disorientation. Just a straight line, like she knew exactly where she was going, and her position against the tree. It wasn't natural. Wasn't how a body settles when someone dies from exposure. She was sitting upright, back straight, hands folded. Deliberate. Posed. I'd seen dozens of exposure deaths. Bodies curl up trying to conserve heat. They're found in fetal positions or slumped over or sprawled awkwardly where they fell. They don't sit up straight with their hands folded like they're meditating. Marcus noticed it too. "That's not right," he said quietly, standing a few feet away from the body. Tom looked pale. "Should we move her?" "No," I said. "Don't touch anything. This is a scene now." The medical examiner couldn't explain it. She arrived about 3 hours later, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves who'd worked with us on recovery operations before. She examined the body in place, took photos, made notes. Then she looked at us with this expression I'd never seen on her face before. Confusion mixed with something else. Concern, maybe. "The body positioning is inconsistent with natural death," she said. "Rigor mortis doesn't work that way. When someone dies, the muscles relax, then they stiffen. But they stiffen in whatever position the body was in when death occurred. This," she gestured at Sarah's upright posture, "this would require the body to be positioned after death, during the early stages of rigor." "Could an animal have done it?" Marcus asked. "No, animals disturb remains, they don't arrange them, and there's no sign of animal activity on the body at all." "So someone moved her," Tom said. "That would be the logical conclusion. But there's no evidence of that either. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle, no foreign fibers or DNA that we can see with a preliminary exam. Just her sitting here like she walked up, sat down, and died." We searched the area around the tree for hours. Looked for any indication of another person. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, anything. Found nothing but Sarah's tracks, leading from the backpack to the tree in that impossibly straight line. The sun was setting by the time we packed up to leave. We'd strung crime scene tape around the area, though nobody really believed it was a crime scene. It was just wrong. Wrong in a way that made all of us uncomfortable. We kept it quiet. Told the family it was exposure, which was true. Didn't mention the arranged backpack, or the missing boots, or the way we'd found her sitting there like she was waiting for something. The official report noted unusual positioning of remains, but attributed it to unknown factors, possibly related to the victim's hypothermic state before death. Her parents came to collect her belongings a week later. I wasn't there for that. Marcus handled it. He told me later that her mother had asked if Sarah suffered, if it had been quick. He'd lied and said yes. What else could he say? But it bothered me. Still bothers me. I went back to that area a few weeks later, off duty, alone. I told myself I was just hiking, clearing my head, but really I wanted to see the place again. Wanted to understand what had happened there. It was late October by then. The leaves had all fallen, and the forest looked different. Bare, exposed. I hiked off trail to the rock outcropping, following the GPS coordinates I'd saved. The rock outcropping where we'd found the backpack was empty. Obviously, we'd collected everything as evidence. But I sat there for a while, looking at the spot where her things had been arranged, trying to imagine what she'd been thinking. What makes a person stop in the middle of the wilderness, unpack their survival gear, and arrange it like they're organizing a display. Even with hypothermia, even with confusion and disorientation, that level of deliberate action doesn't make sense. Then I walked to the tree. It was a large Douglas fir, probably 100 years old. Nothing special about it. Nothing that would draw someone toward it specifically. But she'd walked straight to it, sat down against it, and died there. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the tree, at the forest around it, trying to feel what she might have felt. And I did feel something. A stillness. A presence. Like the air itself was watching. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no wind, no small animals rustling in the undergrowth. Just silence so complete it felt deliberate. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, though the sun was still up. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Felt this overwhelming urge to leave, to get away from that tree, to stop trying to understand. I left quickly after that. Hiked back to my truck faster than I needed to. Didn't look back. Told myself I was being irrational, that there was nothing supernatural about a woman dying of exposure in the wilderness. People die in the woods all the time. It's tragic, but it's not mysterious. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me. Watching. Waiting. A year later, we had another missing person case. Different area, about 5 miles east of where we'd found Sarah. Different circumstances, but it ended the same way. A hiker named Robert Mitchell, 46 years old, went missing on a solo backpacking trip. We found his backpack 3 days into the search. Same arrangement. Contents laid out in a neat line, organized by size. And 100 yards away we found Robert, sitting against a tree, hands folded, eyes closed. Dead for approximately 2 days. Exposure, no boots. I was there when we found him. Saw the same impossible posture, the same deliberate positioning. This time, I knew immediately what we were looking at, even if I didn't understand it. Dr. Reeves was the medical examiner again. She examined the body, then looked at me. This is the same as the Chen case. I know. That's not a coincidence. I know. But what were we supposed to do? Report that we think something in the Montana wilderness is posing dead hikers? That some unknown force is arranging people's belongings and leading them to their deaths? We'd sound insane. We filed the same kind of report we'd filed for Sarah. Exposure, unusual circumstances, no evidence of foul play. Then it happened again 2 years after that. A woman named Jennifer Holbrook, 53 years old. Experienced hiker, same pattern. Backpack arranged, body posed, boots missing, 3 cases, 3 deaths. All ruled as exposure, all with the same unexplained details that we quietly left out of the official reports. By this point, some of the team members were starting to talk. Not officially, but in private conversations. Marcus thought it might be some kind of serial killer who was staging the scenes to look like accidents. Tom thought it might be related to some kind of mental health crisis that caused similar behavioral patterns. But I'd been to that tree, felt that presence. I thought it was something else. I'm not with search and rescue anymore. I left the job 4 years ago. Told everyone I was retiring, moving closer to family. That was partially true. But really, I just couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep searching those woods knowing what I might find. The last case was different, though. That one stays with me more than the others. It was a teenager, 17 years old. Kid named Michael Torres. He'd gone hiking with friends, got separated from the group, never made it back. We found his backpack on the same rock outcropping where we'd found Sarah Chen's pack years earlier. Same arrangement, same careful organization, same missing boots, but we never found Michael. We searched for weeks, covered every inch of that forest. Brought in dogs, thermal imaging, Volunteers, everything we had. The dogs tracked his scent from the backpack, but lost it about 50 yards away, right where the ground transitioned from dirt to rocky terrain. The thermal imaging showed nothing. The volunteers found nothing. He's still out there somewhere. Either his body is hidden where we couldn't find it, or something else happened. Something we don't have a name for. His parents still call me sometimes, even though I'm retired. Even though I have nothing new to tell them. They just want to talk to someone who was there, who looked for their son. I listen, and I tell them we did everything we could. I don't tell them about the other cases. Don't tell them about the pattern. What would be the point? Sometimes I wonder if I should have reported it differently. Should have pushed for a more thorough investigation into those deaths. Should have insisted that something was wrong, that this wasn't just coincidence. But I didn't. None of us did. Because what would we say? That we think something in those woods is arranging people's belongings and posing their bodies? That we think something is taking their boots as some kind of trophy? It sounds insane. I know it sounds insane, but I've seen those backpacks, seen those bodies, seen that tree, and I know what I felt standing there in that forest. Something is out there. Something that makes people unpack their things, arrange them carefully, and walk barefoot to their deaths. Something that poses them like they're waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. I don't hike in Montana anymore. And I never go near Blacktail Ridge. Not even in daylight. Not ever again. I've been a long-haul trucker for 23 years. Started when I was 25, right after my marriage fell apart, and I needed to get away from everything. Figured driving would give me time to think, time to clear my head. And it did, for a while. I've driven every major highway in the continental United States. I-80 from coast to coast, I-10 through the southern states, I-95 up and down the eastern seaboard. Driven through every kind of weather, every time of day. Seen things most people never see. Accidents, stranded motorists, wildlife you wouldn't believe. The sunrise over the Rockies, storm clouds rolling across the plains like something out of a painting. You spend enough time on the road and you develop routines. You learn which rest stops have the cleanest bathrooms, which truck stops have the best coffee, which stretches of highway are dangerous in bad weather. You learn to read the road, anticipate problems, stay alert even when exhaustion pulls at your eyelids. But there's one stretch of road I won't drive anymore. Not at night. Not ever. It's a section of Highway 50 in Nevada. They call it the loneliest road in America, and they're not wrong. Miles and miles of nothing. Just desert and sky and the occasional abandoned building. You can drive for an hour without seeing another car. No cell service, no gas stations. Just you and the road in the darkness. I used to like that route. The emptiness, the silence. It gave me time to think without distractions. I'd haul freight from Sacramento to Denver a few times a month, and Highway 50 was the most direct path through Nevada. Save time, save fuel, get the job done. Most drivers avoid it. Say it's too isolated, too risky. If you break down out there, you could be stuck for hours before anyone comes along. And if something goes wrong in the middle of the night, you're on your own. No cell service means no calling for help. You just have to wait and hope someone eventually drives past. But I never had problems with it. Did that run maybe 40, 50 times over the years. Always smooth. Always uneventful. Just me and the desert and the stars so bright they looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. This happened in March of 2017. I'd picked up a load in Sacramento, standard freight. Nothing special. Pallets of consumer goods heading to a distribution center. Was supposed to deliver it to Denver by Friday morning. Left Sacramento around 6 in the evening, figured I'd drive through the night, take a break somewhere in Utah and finish the run the next day. The sun was setting as I crossed into Nevada. Beautiful sunset that night. Orange and red spreading across the sky like fire. The kind of sunset that makes you forget about everything else for a moment, just appreciate the view. I had the radio on, scanning through stations, mostly getting static. That's normal for that area. Too remote for most signals to reach. I found one station that came through clear. Some classic rock station out of Reno. Led Zeppelin, the Eagles, the usual. Good driving music. I settled in, adjusted my seat, and watched the sky fade from orange to purple to black. By the time I hit Highway 50, it was full dark. Maybe 9 o'clock. The road was empty like it always was. Just my headlights cutting through the darkness, the white lines of the highway stretching ahead into nothing. The temperature had dropped. Desert nights get cold fast once the sun goes down. I had the heat running but kept the window cracked an inch, liked the feel of cold air on my face, helped keep me alert. I'd been driving for about 2 hours when I saw the car. It was pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. A sedan looked like a Honda or Toyota, something compact. Dark blue or black, hard to tell in the darkness. No other vehicles around. No lights from buildings. Just this one car sitting there with its hazards on. I slowed down as I approached. Standard procedure. You see someone broken down in the middle of nowhere, you at least slow down to check if they need help. Most truckers do this. We look out for each other, look out for anyone stuck on the road. Sometimes people just need a phone to call for a tow truck. Sometimes they need water or directions. As I got closer, I could see someone standing next to the car. A woman looked like. She was waving at me, not frantically, just raising her hand like she was trying to flag me down. I pulled over, about 50 feet ahead of her car. Put on my own hazards. Grabbed my flashlight from the compartment between the seats and climbed down from the cab. The night was cold. Desert cold. The kind that seeps into your bones. No wind, though. Just still, cold air, and the sound of my boots on the asphalt. Above me, the stars were brilliant. More stars than you ever see near cities. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. I walked back toward the woman. She was standing by the driver's side door, watching me approach. As I got closer, I could see she was maybe in her 30s, wearing jeans and a light jacket. Long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked calm. Too calm, maybe, for someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. "You okay?" I called out when I was about 20 feet away. "Car died," she said. Her voice was calm, no panic in it. "Just stopped running, won't start." I walked up to her car and looked in through the window. The interior light was on. Keys were in the ignition. Everything looked normal. No visible damage. No smoke or strange smells. "You try jumping it?" I asked. "Don't have cables. I've got some in my truck. Want me to give it a try?" She nodded. "That would be great. Thank you." Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the isolation, the darkness. The way her voice was so calm when most people would be stressed about being stranded in the middle of nowhere. Most people would be talking more, explaining what happened, thanking me profusely. She just stood there, quiet, watching me. I walked back to my truck and grabbed the jumper cables from the storage compartment behind the cab, pulled my rig up closer to her car, positioned it so I could reach her battery with the cables. The whole process took maybe 5 minutes. The whole time she just stood there watching me. Didn't offer to help, didn't make small talk, didn't even pull out her phone to text someone that help had arrived. Just watched. Her hands were in her jacket pockets. Her face was expressionless. I popped her hood and attached the cables to her battery. Standard procedure. Red to positive, black to negative. Then attached the other ends to my truck's battery. "Okay, try starting it," I called out. She got in her car and turned the key. The engine cranked but didn't catch. Strong crank though, so the battery wasn't dead. Tried again. Same thing. The battery wasn't the problem. "Might be your fuel pump," I said, "or the alternator. Hard to tell without proper tools. Could be the starter even though it's cranking. Might need a mechanic to look at it." She got out of the car and stood there looking at me. That's when I noticed her eyes. Even in the dim light from my truck's headlights, I could see them. They were wrong somehow. Not the color or the shape, just the way she looked at me. Empty. Like she was looking through me instead of at me. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked. I hesitated. In 23 years of trucking, I'd given maybe a dozen people rides. Usually, other truckers whose rigs had broken down. Occasionally, a stranded motorist heading to the nearest town. But something about this felt wrong. "Where do you need to go?" I asked. "East," she said. "Just east. I'm heading to Denver. Can drop you at the next town if you want. Austin's about 40 miles up the road. They've got a gas station, probably a motel. That's fine?" She didn't ask about her car. Didn't ask if we should call for a tow truck. Didn't grab anything from the vehicle. No purse, no phone, no bag. Just walked toward my truck like she'd been planning to do this all along. "Don't you want to get anything from your car?" I asked. "Wallet? Phone?" "I have what I need," she said. I disconnected the jumper cables and put them away. The whole time I felt this growing unease in my gut. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. But I'd already offered her a ride, and leaving someone stranded out here felt wrong too. So I ignored my instincts and made a decision I'd regret. She climbed up into the passenger seat of my truck without waiting for me. When I got in, she was sitting there with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. "You got a phone?" I asked. "Might want to call someone. Let them know where you are. Maybe call a tow truck for your car." "No phone," she said. "You can use mine if you need to." No need. I started the engine, pulled back onto the highway and accelerated up to speed. The road ahead was empty. Nothing but darkness and the white lines and my headlights showing about 100 feet of asphalt before it all disappeared into black. We drove in silence for maybe 10 minutes. I kept glancing over at her. She hadn't moved, hadn't turned her head, just sat there staring straight ahead with her hands folded. Her breathing was so quiet I couldn't hear it over the engine noise. "You from around here?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "No. Where you from?" She didn't answer. I tried again. "You got family you need to call? People who might be worried?" No. The heater was running, but I felt cold. That bone-deep cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I turned the heat up. Didn't help. We passed a mile marker, then another. The road stayed empty. No other cars. No signs of civilization. Just endless desert on both sides disappearing into darkness. The radio had gone back to static. I tried scanning for another station but found nothing. "There's a town about 40 miles ahead," I said. "Austin. Small place, but they've got a gas station, maybe a motel. I can drop you there. You can figure out what to do about your car in the morning." She turned her head to look at me for the first time since getting in the truck. Her eyes caught the light from the dashboard. They reflected it back in a way that wasn't quite right. Like an animal's eyes in headlights. "I don't want to go to Austin," she said. "Where do you want to go?" "Just keep driving." "I need to know where you want me to drop you off." "Keep driving," she repeated. Her voice hadn't changed, still calm, still flat, but there was something in it now that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Look," I said, "I'm happy to help, but I need to know where you're going. I've got a schedule to keep. Can't just drive around all night." She didn't respond, just turned her head back to face forward and sat there in silence. I should have pulled over right then, should have told her to get out. But I didn't. I just kept driving, and I don't know why. It was like some part of my brain had shut off, the part that makes decisions, that recognizes danger. I just kept my foot on the accelerator and my hands on the wheel, and drove. We drove for another 20 minutes. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked that I could see, just sat there staring forward. I tried to focus on the road, but I kept looking over at her hands folded in her lap, at her profile silhouetted against the passenger window, at the way she didn't seem to breathe. Then I saw something ahead. At first, I thought it was another vehicle. 2 red lights in the distance, like tail lights. But as we got closer, I realized they weren't moving. They were just sitting there in the middle of the road. I slowed down. The lights got brighter as we approached. Not tail lights, something else. They had this quality to them that wasn't quite right. Too red, too bright, too steady. They didn't blink or flicker like normal lights. Just glowed with this intense red that hurt to look at. "What is that?" I said, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer. I slowed to maybe 40 miles an hour. The lights were maybe 100 yards ahead now. I still couldn't tell what they were. They seemed to be hovering about 3 feet off the ground, right in the center of the highway. There was nothing else visible, no vehicle, no structure. Just those 2 red lights burning in the darkness. 50 yards away. I could see now that there was definitely nothing beneath the lights. No vehicle, no reflectors, no anything. Just 2 red lights floating in the air, impossibly bright, impossibly still. My foot moved toward the brake. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to get away from those lights, but I couldn't seem to make my body obey. I just kept driving toward them, speed dropping slowly, 35 miles an hour, 30, 25, 20 yards. The lights were enormous now, filled my entire field of vision. That red glow was everywhere, reflecting off the hood of my truck, off the windshield, off the white lines of the highway. I could feel heat coming from them. Or maybe that was just my imagination. Then I hit the brakes, hard. The air brakes hissed and the truck shuddered as it slowed. We came to a stop maybe 10 yards from the lights. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at those lights, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Did you see that?" I said. I turned to look at the woman. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty. Door was still closed. Window was still up. The seatbelt was still fastened, hanging loose against the seat back. She was just gone. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, looked around the cab. Behind me at the sleeper compartment. Back at the passenger seat. She wasn't there. Couldn't be there. But she was gone. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. Just my headlights showing empty highway stretching ahead into nothing. No red lights. No glow. Nothing. I sat there in the silence, my breath coming fast, my hands shaking on the wheel. This wasn't possible. People don't just vanish from moving vehicles. The door hadn't opened. I would have heard it, felt the change in air pressure, felt the truck shift as she climbed out. She couldn't have climbed out the window. The window was still closed, and we'd been going 25 miles an hour. She couldn't have just jumped out without me noticing, but she was gone. I grabbed my flashlight and searched the cab, under the seat, behind the seat, in the sleeper compartment. Checked every inch of space where a person could possibly hide. Nothing. No sign she'd ever been there. I opened my door and climbed down. The cold air hit me like a wall. I walked around the entire truck, checking every surface, shining my flashlight into every shadow. The passenger door was locked from the inside. No way she could have opened it and closed it from the outside while we were moving. I stood there in the middle of Highway 50, surrounded by darkness so complete it felt solid, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Then I remembered her car. I got back in my truck, turned around in the middle of the highway and drove back the way I'd come. Drove carefully, watching the shoulder, looking for that blue sedan with the hazard lights blinking. I drove for 30 minutes, past the mile markers I'd noted on the way, past the spot where I was certain I'd stopped. I'd marked it mentally by an unusual rock formation on the north side of the highway. But there was no car, no tire marks on the shoulder, no oil stains, no broken glass, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I kept driving west for another hour, all the way back to the last town I'd passed through before getting on Highway 50, a place called Fallon. Found an all-night diner on the main street and pulled into the parking lot. I sat there with the engine running and all the lights on. Sat there until the sun came up, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to pale blue. Watching the stars fade. Watching the desert take shape around me as dawn broke. The waitress from the diner came out around 6 in the morning, asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just tired. Needed a minute before I went inside. She nodded and went back in. I called my dispatcher and told him I was running behind schedule. Told him I'd had truck trouble, needed to get something checked. He wasn't happy, but he accepted it. Asked if I needed a replacement driver. I told him no, I'd have it sorted out soon. I never told him what really happened. Never told anyone until now. I went into the diner and ordered coffee and breakfast. Sat in a booth by the window and watched the morning traffic start to build. Normal people doing normal things. Going to work, getting gas, living their regular lives. I felt like I'd stepped out of reality for a few hours and then stepped back in, and nothing made sense anymore. I finished the run to Denver that afternoon. Took a different route. I-80 north through Reno, then east across Wyoming. Added 6 hours to the drive, but I didn't care. I needed to be on roads with traffic, roads with lights, roads that felt normal. I've driven past that stretch of Highway 50 a few times since then. Always during the day, never at night. And I always speed up when I go through, don't stop for anything. Don't care if I see someone broken down. Don't care if my conscience tells me to help. I just keep driving. Sometimes I wonder if she was real, if any of it was real. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel, had some kind of vivid dream. Maybe the isolation and the darkness played tricks on my mind. Maybe I was more tired than I realized and hallucinated the whole thing. But I remember how she looked, how she spoke, how cold I felt sitting next to her. And I remember that empty passenger seat, the seatbelt still fastened, still warm from where she'd been sitting. I don't know what I picked up on Highway 50 that night, but it wasn't human, and whatever those lights were, I'm glad I stopped before I reached them. Because I don't think I would have come back. Not all of me, anyway. I stopped being a cop 3 years ago. Didn't retire. Didn't transfer to another department. Just turned in my badge and walked away. Told everyone I was burned out, needed a change. That was true enough. But it wasn't the whole truth. There's one case I worked that changed everything. One night that made me realize some things can't be explained, can't be rationalized, can't be fixed. Some things you just have to walk away from. I was a patrol officer in a mid-sized town in Oregon. Population maybe 40,000. College town. Quiet most of the year except when school was in session. The kind of place where the biggest problems were usually drunk college kids or petty theft or domestic disputes. Real crime was rare. Homicides almost never happened. I'd been on the force for 11 years when this happened. Started right out of the academy when I was 23, Worked my way up from rookie to senior patrol officer. I knew the town, knew the people, knew which streets had the most problems, and which neighborhoods were safe to walk through at night. Knew which bars would have trouble on Friday nights, and which convenience stores got hit by shoplifters most often. It was a good job, stable, predictable. I'd married my wife Sarah in year 3 on the force. We bought a house in year 5. Had a daughter, Emma, in year 7. Life was normal, good. I thought I'd do this job until retirement. Maybe make sergeant eventually. Then spend my golden years fishing and watching my grandkids grow up. October 2019. I was working night shift, which I preferred. Less traffic, fewer calls, more time to just drive around and think. The town was quieter at night, peaceful. I'd drive through neighborhoods and see the warm glow of lights in windows. Families settled in for the evening, and it made me feel like I was doing something important, keeping them safe while they slept. My partner that night was a younger guy named Derek Chen. Good cop, smart, calm under pressure. He'd been on the force for 3 years, came from a family of cops. His father had been LAPD for 25 years before retiring. Derek knew the work, respected it, took it seriously. We'd been partnered for about 6 months and worked well together. He didn't talk too much, didn't try to fill every silence with conversation. We could ride for hours without speaking and it never felt awkward. It was a Tuesday night, quiet. We'd taken maybe 3 calls all shift. A noise complaint around 10 p.m., neighbors feuding over a loud TV. We knocked on the door, asked them to turn it down. Everyone was polite and cooperative. A suspicious vehicle around 11:30 that turned out to be someone lost looking for an address. Elderly couple trying to find their son's new apartment. We gave them directions and watched them drive off safely. A welfare check around 1 a.m. on an elderly woman whose daughter hadn't heard from her in a few days. She was fine, just had her phone turned off because she didn't like being bothered in the evenings. The kind of calls that made up 90% of police work. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just helping people with small problems. Around 2 in the morning, we got a call about a disturbance at one of the parks on the east side of town. Someone had called in saying they heard screaming. Dispatch gave us the address and we headed over. It wasn't unusual. Parks after dark attracted teenagers, homeless people sometimes, occasionally someone having a mental health crisis. We'd respond, assess the situation, handle it appropriately. The park was called Riverside Commons, about 20 acres of open space along the Willamette River. Walking paths, playground, picnic areas, a small amphitheater that hosted concerts in summer, basketball courts. During the day, it was full of families and joggers and people walking their dogs. At night, it was empty, officially closed after dark, though people still went there sometimes. Teenagers mostly, drinking or smoking or just hanging out away from their parents. We pulled into the parking lot around 2:15. There were no other cars. No lights except the street lights at the edge of the lot casting long shadows across the empty asphalt. The park itself was dark, just shapes of trees and playground equipment silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky. Clouds covered most of the stars. No moon visible. Derek radioed our position to dispatch and we got out. The air was cold. October in Oregon, temperatures dropping into the 40s at night. I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. Could hear the river running somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees. That constant rushing sound of water moving fast over rocks. We walked into the park, flashlights out, looking around. The playground was empty. Swings hanging motionless. Slide reflecting our flashlight beams. The picnic areas were empty. Nothing looked disturbed. No trash scattered around suggesting people had been partying. No beer bottles or drug paraphernalia. Probably just kids messing around, Derek said. Someone heard them yelling and thought it was screaming. Probably, I agreed. We'd had calls like this before. Someone hears teenagers being loud, calls it in as a disturbance. By the time we arrive, everyone's gone. Standard procedure was to do a quick walkthrough, make sure no one was injured or in trouble, then clear the call. We walked further in, following one of the main paths. Our flashlights swept across empty benches, trash cans, informational signs about the local wildlife and river ecosystem. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. Just a park at night, waiting for morning to bring it back to life. Then I heard it, a sound from deeper in the park. Not screaming exactly, more like someone crying, low and continuous, coming from somewhere near the river. Derek heard it too. He looked at me, his expression shifting from relaxed to alert. I nodded. We moved toward the sound, off the main path now, pushing through some overgrown vegetation toward the riverbank. Blackberry bushes caught at our uniforms. Low branches from willow trees hung down, forcing us to duck. The crying got louder as we got closer. Definitely a person. Female sounded like. Not words, just this continuous sobbing sound. The kind of crying that comes from deep grief. The kind where the person can't catch their breath, can't form words, can only make these raw sounds of pain. We came out of the trees onto the riverbank. The river was about 30 feet wide here, moving fast, reflecting what little light there was from the partially clouded sky. The water was high from recent rains, running over rocks that would normally be exposed, creating white foam where it hit obstacles. And sitting on the bank, maybe 20 feet away from us, was a woman. She was facing the water, long dark hair hanging loose, reaching almost to her waist, wearing what looked like a nightgown or a long white dress. Her shoulders were shaking. That crying sound was coming from her. "Ma'am?" I called out. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, just kept crying. That constant rhythmic sobbing. Derek and I exchanged a glance. This could be anything. A suicide attempt. Someone having a breakdown, someone on drugs, someone with mental illness. We had to approach carefully, assess the situation, determine the level of threat to her and to us. We approached slowly, our flashlights illuminating her from behind. "Ma'am, we're police officers. We got a call about a disturbance. Are you hurt?" Still no response. We got within 10 feet of her and I could see her more clearly in my flashlight beam. The dress she was wearing was soaked, water dripping from the hem, creating a dark stain on the ground around her. Her hair was wet too, plastered to her back, water dripping from the ends, like she'd just climbed out of the river. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She stopped crying. Just stopped, mid-sob, went completely silent. The sudden silence was worse than the crying. The only sound was the river and our breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in a breeze I couldn't feel. Then she turned her head to look at us. I've seen a lot of things in 11 years as a cop. Seen people high on drugs with that vacant stare, pupils dilated or constricted, skin pallid, movements jerky. Seen people in shock after traumatic events with that 1,000-yard stare, looking through you instead of at you, their minds trying to process something too terrible to comprehend. Seen mentally ill people in crisis with that disconnected look in their eyes, lost in worlds only they could see. This was different. Her eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. Empty. Like looking at a mannequin, at something designed to look human but missing the essential spark that made a person a person. And her face was wrong. The proportions were off somehow. Or maybe it was just the way the shadows fell from our flashlights. But looking at her made something primal in my brain start screaming danger. The same instinct that would tell you to run from a predator or back away from a cliff edge. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Derek asked. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension in it. He felt it too. She stood up, didn't use her hands, didn't shift her weight or push off from the ground. Just stood up in one smooth motion like she was being lifted by invisible wires. The wet dress clung to her body. Water pooled at her bare feet, pale against the dark mud of the riverbank. "You need to come with us," I said, my hand moving unconsciously toward my service weapon. "We need to make sure you're okay. Maybe get you to a hospital." She tilted her head, like a bird. That same jerky, angular movement birds make when they're studying something, trying to determine if it's food or threat or nothing at all. Then she smiled, not a normal smile. Too wide, showing too many teeth. The corners of her mouth pulling back further than they should be able to go. Like someone who'd seen people smile but didn't quite understand the mechanics of it, the emotion behind it. Like a child's drawing of a smile, exaggerated and wrong. "Something's wrong with her," Derek whispered. I knew. Every instinct I had was telling me to back away, to get out of there, to stop looking at her because looking at her too long was dangerous somehow. But I was a cop. This was my job. She was clearly in distress, possibly injured, possibly having some kind of mental health crisis or drug-induced episode. We couldn't just leave her. We had a duty to help. "Ma'am, we're going to help you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and authoritative. "But you need to come with us. Come back to our car. We'll get you warm, get you some help." She took a step toward us, then another, moving in that same smooth way, like she was gliding rather than walking. Her feet touched the ground, but there was no weight transfer, no natural shift of balance. Just this fluid forward motion that looked wrong. Derek's hand went to his service weapon. Didn't draw it. Just rested his hand on the grip. Thumb on the retention strap, ready. "Stay back," I said, holding up my hand in a stop gesture. "Don't come any closer. Stay where you are." She stopped, that smile still on her face. Water still dripping from her dress, from her hair. Dripping so much that the ground around her feet was turning to mud, dark and thick. More water than should be coming from wet clothing, like she was a vessel slowly emptying. "Can you tell us your name?" I asked. She opened her mouth. What came out wasn't words, it was that crying sound again, but louder now. So loud it hurt my ears. A wailing that seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the trees, echoing across the water, reverberating in my chest. The kind of sound that bypassed the ears and went straight into your bones. I stumbled back, hands going to my ears. Derek did the same. The sound went on, impossibly sustained, no breath behind it, just this endless keening. Then she ran, not toward us, past us, moving so fast she was just a white blur against the darkness. I heard Derek shout something, but I couldn't make out what over the ringing in my ears. We turned and ran after her, flashlights bouncing, trying to keep her in sight. She was heading back toward the parking lot. We ran after her, crashing through brush, thorns catching at our clothes, low branches whipping at our faces. Following the white shape of her dress through the darkness, like a ghost fleeing back to wherever ghosts go when they're done with the living. We burst out of the trees into the parking lot. Our patrol car was there, lights still on, exactly where we'd left it. But the woman was gone. We swept the area with our flashlights. Nothing. No sign of her. The parking lot was small, maybe 50 yards across, completely open with streetlights illuminating every corner. No buildings, no cars, no dumpsters or structures to hide behind. She couldn't have made it across to the other side that fast. Even running at full speed, it would have taken 15, 20 seconds. We'd been right behind her, but she wasn't there. Where did she go? Derek was breathing hard, spinning in a circle, looking everywhere. his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness in frantic arcs. I walked slowly toward our patrol car, noticed something on the ground next to the driver's side door. Water, a puddle of water already starting to spread across the asphalt, reflecting the streetlights above. And footprints, wet footprints, leading from the puddle to the car door. The car door was open. I approached slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to get back in the car, to leave this place and never come back. But I was a cop. I had to know. I looked inside. The driver's seat was soaked, water pooling in the depression where I'd been sitting. Water on the steering wheel. Water running down the door panel. And sitting in the passenger seat, perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, was the woman. She turned her head to look at me. That same empty stare. That same wrong smile. Water dripping from her hair onto the seat, onto the floor, onto her folded hands. "Derek," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off her. "Get back to the car. Now." He came over, saw her sitting there, and froze. His hand went back to his weapon. "How did she—" "Doesn't matter. We need to get her out of the car." But I didn't want to touch her. Didn't want to get close to her. Every part of me was screaming to run, to abandon the car, to call for backup and let someone else handle this. But that wasn't how it worked. We were the backup. We were the ones who were supposed to handle things. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, professional. "You need to exit the vehicle. This is a police vehicle. You can't be in here." She didn't move, just sat there with her hands folded, water dripping, that smile on her face. I reached for my radio to call for backup. Before I could key the mic, she spoke. Not that crying sound. Words. Actual words. But her mouth didn't move right. Her lips didn't form the shapes they should. Like she was learning how to form sounds, mimicking something she'd heard but didn't understand. "He's still down there," she said. Her voice was wrong. Too many tones at once. Like multiple people speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. Like a choir where everyone's singing the same note but some are sharp and some are flat. "Who's down there?" I asked. "In the water. He's been down there so long in the dark and the cold and the water moving over him." "Who are you talking about?" "Who's in the water?" She turned to look at Derek. "You'll find him when the water goes down 3 miles upstream. He's been waiting for someone to find him, waiting for someone to bring him home." "Ma'am, I need you to—" Then she was gone. Not moving, not opening the door and running. Just gone. Between one blink and the next. The seat was still wet. The floorboard still had water pooled in it. The air was still cold with the smell of river water. But she wasn't there. Derek walked to the edge of the parking lot and threw up. I heard him retching, heard the splash of vomit hitting pavement. I couldn't move, just stood there staring at the empty passenger seat, at the water, at the place where she'd been. After a moment, I walked around to check the back seat. Empty, checked the trunk, empty. Looked around the entire parking lot again. Nothing. She was gone. Derek came back wiping his mouth. His face was pale in the streetlight. What the fuck was that? I don't know. That wasn't human. I don't know what it was. Should we report it? I thought about that. Thought about calling dispatch and trying to explain what we'd just seen. Thought about writing a report that detailed a woman who appeared soaking wet, moved impossibly fast, vanished from a locked car. Thought about sitting across from our supervisor trying to explain why we both sounded insane. "Report what?" I said. "That we saw a woman who disappeared. They'll think we're crazy. They'll order psych evaluations. They'll pull us off the street." "What about what she said, About someone in the water? I'd been thinking about that, 3 miles upstream, when the water goes down. We'd had heavy rain for the past 2 weeks. The river was running high, at least 3 feet higher than normal, but the forecast said clear weather for the next week, maybe longer. The water would drop. Banks that were underwater now would be exposed. "We'll check it out," I said. "When the water goes down, if we find anything, we report it then. Say we were doing a routine patrol of the riverbank and spotted something. We don't mention tonight, we don't mention her." Derek nodded. He looked pale, shaken, like someone had pulled back a curtain and shown him something that shouldn't exist. I probably looked the same. We sat in the car for a while, neither of us saying anything. The water in the driver's seat soaked through my uniform pants. I didn't care, didn't even register it. I just sat there staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had happened, trying to find some rational explanation, and failing completely. "Maybe we both fell asleep," Derek said finally. "Maybe we dozed off in the car and had the same nightmare. We weren't in the car. Maybe we're both having some kind of carbon monoxide poisoning, hallucinating. We were outside, in fresh air. Maybe there's no explanation," I said. "Not one that makes sense. We saw what we saw." We sat there a while longer. Finally, I radioed dispatch, told them we'd checked the park, found no disturbance, and were clearing the call. My voice sounded normal, calm, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just seen something that violated every law of physics and nature I understood. We finished our shift, drove around the rest of the night in silence, took 2 more calls, both routine. A burglar alarm at a business that turned out to be faulty. A minor traffic accident with no injuries. We handled them professionally, efficiently, like normal cops on a normal shift. But we weren't normal anymore. Something had changed. Something fundamental. Like we'd been living in a world with certain rules and now we knew those rules didn't always apply. We didn't talk about it again that night, didn't mention it in our reports. Just wrote up the call as unfounded, no subjects located, cleared without incident. I went home at the end of shift. Sarah was still asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom watching her breathe, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her shoulders, and felt this overwhelming need to protect her, to keep her safe from things she didn't know existed. I checked on Emma. She was 7 then, sleeping in her room surrounded by stuffed animals and princess posters. So innocent, so unaware of how strange and terrible the world could be. I didn't sleep that day, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over. The crying, the way she moved, those empty eyes, that wrong smile, the words she'd spoken in that impossible voice. He's been waiting. A week later, the rain stopped. The weather cleared. The river started dropping. I watched the forecasts obsessively, checked the river gauges online multiple times a day, waited for the water level to drop enough to expose the banks. On my day off, 9 days after that night in the park, I drove out alone. Didn't tell Sarah where I was going. Didn't tell Derek. Just got in my personal truck and drove 3 miles upstream from Riverside Commons. The river had dropped significantly. Rocks and sandbars that had been underwater were now exposed. The banks were wider, showing the high water line in the mud and debris. I parked at a pullout and walked down to the river. Followed the bank, looking carefully at everything, looking for anything that didn't belong. I found him about 40 minutes into my search, wedged between 2 large rocks in the shallow water. Body badly decomposed, had been there for months at least. He was face down. What remained of his clothes were dark with algae and mud. His hands were tangled in branches and debris that had accumulated around the rocks. The water must have carried him downstream during the spring floods, deposited him here when the current changed, and he'd been trapped ever since. I stood there for a long moment, looking at him. This person who had been alive once, who had a name and a life and people who cared about him, who had ended up in the river somehow and been lost, who had been down there in the dark and the cold with the water moving over him, just like she'd said, waiting for someone to find him. I called it in, used my cell phone instead of the radio, told dispatch I was off duty, had been hiking along the river, spotted something that looked like human remains, gave them the location, waited. The response was quick. 2 patrol units arrived within 15 minutes. Then detectives, then the medical examiner. They cordoned off the area, took photos, began the careful process of recovery and investigation. I gave my statement to a detective I knew, guy named Martinez. Told him I'd been hiking, wanted to check out how much the water had dropped after the rains. Saw something unusual between the rocks. Came closer to investigate. Realized it was a body. Called it in immediately. Martinez wrote it all down. Asked a few follow-up questions. Where exactly had I been standing when I first saw it? Had I touched anything? Had I seen anyone else in the area? Standard questions. I answered them all honestly. Good catch, Martinez said. Could have been there for years before anyone spotted it. Water's usually too high in this section for people to get close to the bank. The body was identified as James Morrison, 38 years old, local man who'd gone missing 7 months earlier in March. His car had been found abandoned near the river about 5 miles upstream. Personal effects still inside. Keys in the ignition. No note. No signs of foul play. Everyone had assumed suicide. Jumped in and drowned. It happened sometimes. The Willamette could be dangerous, especially during spring runoff when the current was strong and the water was cold. A person wouldn't last long. Bodies sometimes traveled miles downstream before getting caught on something. But they'd never recovered Morrison's body. Search and rescue had looked for weeks. Dragged the river, checked the banks. Nothing. Eventually they'd called it off, listed him as presumed dead by drowning. Until now, the ME said he'd probably been dead since around the time he went missing. The decomposition was consistent with 7 months in water. The body had been trapped underwater, held down by the rocks and the current and the weight of debris that accumulated over time. It was only the drop in water level after the dry spell that exposed it enough to be visible from the bank. I got a commendation for finding him. The chief called me into his office, shook my hand, said I'd helped bring closure to Morrison's family, said it showed dedication to the job, being observant even on my day off. Added a letter to my personnel file praising my commitment to serving the community. Everyone said I was just doing my job, being thorough, being observant, right place at the right time. But I knew that woman, that thing, whatever it was, had told us exactly where to find him. Had told us to wait for the water to go down. Had told us 3 miles upstream. Had known he was there waiting to be found. I never told anyone about that night. Never told the detectives or the medical examiner or my supervisor or even my wife. Derek and I talked about it once, a few weeks later. Met for coffee on a day we were both off. We sat there in a corner booth not saying anything for a while. Finally, Derek said, "Did that really happen?" "Yes." "The woman in the park?" "Yes." "And we found Morrison exactly where she said?" "Yes." Another long silence. People around us talking and laughing, living their normal lives, unaware that we were sitting there discussing something impossible. "What was she?" Derek asked. "I don't know." "A ghost? Maybe. I don't know." "Why did she tell us? Why did she want us to find him?" I'd been thinking about that. Maybe he needed to be found. Maybe she was, I don't know, some kind of messenger. Something that exists between the living and the dead. Something that helps the lost get home. That sounds insane. I know. But we saw her. I know. We sat there a while longer, finished our coffee, agreed that we'd keep it to ourselves, that some things didn't need to be explained, that we'd just file it away and try to move on. But it stayed with me. Every shift after that, I'd think about it. Every time we got a call to a park at night or about someone near the river, I'd think about it. Wonder what else was out there. What other things I didn't understand. What other calls might lead to something that couldn't be rationalized. I started having trouble sleeping. Would lie awake at night replaying that moment when she looked at me with those empty eyes. That smile. That voice that wasn't quite human. Would wake up from dreams where I was drowning, water filling my lungs, body trapped under rocks while the current moved over me. Sarah noticed. Asked if everything was okay at work. I told her I was fine, just stressed, nothing serious. She suggested I talk to someone, maybe see a therapist. I said I would, but never did. How could I? What would I say? I started requesting day shifts, stopped volunteering for night patrol, made excuses about wanting to be home with the family in the evenings. My supervisor approved it without question, said I'd earned it after 11 years. But it didn't help. The memory didn't fade. It stayed sharp and clear, more vivid than things that had happened yesterday. I could still see her sitting in that passenger seat, still hear that voice, still feel that cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The months passed. Winter came and went. Spring arrived and the river ran high again with snowmelt from the mountains. I avoided Riverside Commons entirely. Would take different routes on patrol, would volunteer for calls on the other side of town. Anything to stay away from that place, but sometimes I'd drive past it on my days off, during daylight. Always during daylight. I'd slow down as I passed the entrance, look at the parking lot, look at the trees beyond, and I'd wonder if she was still there, still sitting by the riverbank, still waiting. Derek started having problems, too. He didn't talk about it much, but I could see the signs. The dark circles under his eyes. The way he'd jump at sudden noises. The way he'd go quiet sometimes in the middle of a conversation, staring at nothing, lost in thought. One night we were on patrol together, about 6 months after that night at the park. We were driving through a residential neighborhood, everything quiet, when Derek suddenly said, I looked him up. Who? Morrison. James Morrison. Found some old news articles about when he went missing. I didn't say anything, just kept driving. He had a daughter, Derek continued, 8 years old when he died. Wife filed for divorce 2 months before he disappeared. Custody battle. Messy. He lost. Was only allowed supervised visitation. Why are you telling me this? The night he disappeared, he'd just come from his last supervised visit. His daughter was supposed to go live with her mom in California the next week. He was never going to see her again. I pulled over to the side of the road, turned to look at Derek. What's your point? My point is that he didn't just slip and fall in the river. He jumped. He killed himself because he lost his kid and couldn't live with it. Okay. So why? Derek's voice cracked slightly. Why did that thing want us to find him? What was the point? His family already knew he was dead. Finding his body didn't change anything. I'd thought about this too. Thought about it a lot. Maybe it changed something for him. Maybe he needed to be found so he could rest, so he could stop waiting. That's bullshit. Maybe, but what other explanation is there? Derek didn't answer, just stared out the window at the dark houses, at the normal world where dead people stayed buried and didn't send messages through impossible women made of river water. That was the last real conversation we had about it. After that, we just stopped talking about it, stopped acknowledging it, went back to being normal patrol partners dealing with normal calls. But it was always there, between us, under every conversation, behind every silence. 3 years ago, I turned in my badge, told everyone I was burned out, and I was, but not from the job itself, not from the long hours or the difficult calls or the danger, from knowing that there were things out there that I couldn't protect people from, things I couldn't arrest or stop or even begin to understand, things that existed in the spaces between what we know and what we can't explain, things that walked among us and most people never saw them, things that knew secrets the dead carried and could lead the living to truths they weren't ready to accept. Derek left the force about a year after I did, moved to California with his wife, took a job in private security. Good pay, regular hours, no night shifts. We don't keep in touch. I think neither of us wants to talk about it, to acknowledge that it happened, to remember what we saw. I work in IT now. Corporate job. Boring. Safe. I go to an office every day, sit at a desk, fix computer problems, come home at 5 p.m., have dinner with my family, watch Emma do her homework. She's 10 now, wants to be a veterinarian, loves animals, loves life with that pure, uncomplicated enthusiasm only children have. Sometimes I drive past that park. During the day, never at night. I see families there, kids playing on the playground, people walking their dogs along the river, joggers on the paths, teenagers sitting on the benches talking and laughing. And I wonder if they know, if they can feel it, that something is there, something that watches, something that knows where the lost are, something that cries for the dead and helps them be found. I hope they never find out the way I did. I hope they can keep living in the world where things make sense, where the rules of nature apply, where the dead stay dead and the living stay safe in their ignorance. Because once you see what's really there, once you know what exists in the dark places, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to the comfortable certainty of the world you knew before. You just have to live with it. And that's not living at all. It's just waiting. Waiting like Morrison was waiting, trapped underwater, hoping someone would find him. Waiting like I'm waiting now. For what, I don't know. But I know she's still there. Still sitting by that river. Still crying for the lost. Still waiting to tell someone else where the dead are hidden. And someday, someone else will hear her. Someone else will see those empty eyes and that wrong smile. Someone else will listen to that voice that shouldn't exist. And they'll find what she wants them to find. Because that's what she does. That's all she does. Forever. I saw Morrison's widow once, about a year after we found him. Ran into her at a grocery store. She recognized me, came over to thank me. Said finding his body had given her closure. Said she could finally move on, finally accept that he was gone. Said she'd been trapped in this limbo of not knowing, and now she could grieve properly and eventually heal. I told her I was glad I could help, that I was just doing my job, but watching her walk away, seeing the relief in her shoulders, the way she moved with less weight, I wondered if that's why the woman by the river does what she does. If she exists to give people that closure, to help the living move on by showing them where the dead are waiting. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe that's all she is. A terrible mercy that comes in the night to help the lost be found. I'll never know for certain. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about going back to that park. Just to see if she's still there. Just to ask her why. But I never do. Because some questions are better left unasked. Some answers are worse than not knowing. And I've learned that some things in this world exist beyond our understanding. beyond our ability to categorize or explain. We just have to accept them and stay away. Last week, Emma asked me if I missed being a cop. We were sitting at the dinner table, just the two of us. Sarah was working late. Emma had finished her homework and was helping me clean up the dishes. Sometimes, I told her, I liked helping people. Why did you stop? How do you explain to a 10-year-old that you stopped doing your job because you saw something that shouldn't exist? That you encountered something that violated every law of nature you thought you understood? That you realized you couldn't protect people from everything? That there were things out there beyond police work, beyond human comprehension? I got tired, I said. Sometimes jobs wear you out. She accepted that answer, went back to drying dishes, and I stood there at the sink, hands in warm, soapy water, looking out the window at our backyard, at the normal suburban evening, at the safe world I'd built for my family. But I couldn't shake the memory. That woman, that impossible thing sitting in my patrol car, dripping river water, speaking in that voice that wasn't human, telling us exactly where to find a body, knowing things she couldn't possibly know. And I realized something then that I'd been avoiding for 3 years. She's still there, still waiting by that river. And someday she'll have another message, another body to be found, another lost soul waiting in the dark and the cold and the water. And when that day comes, someone else will answer the call. Someone else will walk into Riverside Commons at 2 a.m. Someone else will hear the crying from the riverbank, and they'll see what Derek and I saw. They'll hear what we heard, and their life will change forever, just like ours did. Because that's what she does. That's all she does. She waits. She cries. She tells. And the living find the dead, over and over, forever. I finished the dishes, hugged Emma goodnight, checked the locks on all the doors, went upstairs and got into bed next to Sarah. And I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, thinking about that park, thinking about that woman, thinking about all the things I used to believe about the world and how wrong I was. But I'm safe now. I don't work nights anymore. I don't patrol anymore. I don't answer those calls. Someone else does. And I hope they're ready for what they might find. Because I wasn't, and neither was Derek, and whoever goes to Riverside Commons next won't be either. Nobody ever is.